just the way what it did, because that fish ate it, and like my SD card ran out of memory partway into that, so we missed some of the best stuff because after it ate, it ran upstream. You heard the line tearing as it went upstream, and then it did a 180-degree turn, and its back was halfway out of the water, going all the way back downstream, way back down below where the fish ate it originally.
Welcome to In the Bucket, the podcast that explores the culture of spey fishing in the Pacific Northwest, a spectacular land of mountains and wild rivers where every cast has a story to tell. I'm your host, Brian Niska.
Thank you for joining us today. We have an interesting show coming your way with pro guide Trevor Covich and fly designer Alex Belonga. These guys have never met before, but they share a passion for king salmon fishing. Alex is well known for creative salmon and steelhead flies. Trevor is a legendary spey guide, splitting his time between Washington's Olympic Peninsula and some of the best waters in Alaska. We're going to get some great tips on fly selection, efficient spey casting, and how to land more large salmon and steelhead. So yes, it's time to get in the bucket. Right on. Welcome, everybody. I am here now with Alex Belonga and Trevor Covich. Welcome, guys.
Howdy.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Alex, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I was born and raised in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Pretty much grown up here my whole life. My wife and I both from here. We're in St. Ignace, right across the bridge, and have kids, a landscaping business, and just really blessed to be literally sandwiched by three of the Great Lakes and all kinds of rivers and stuff. So it's just a nice area, I think. So
you're practically Canadian right there. Pretty close.
Almost. Yep. Most people think that we're Canadian when they hear us talk. So except for Canadians, of course.
My name's Trevor, Washington State fishing guide here in Forks, Washington. Grew up outside Seattle, but just fished Washington most of my life. Was a diehard skier, snowboarder until I caught a steelhead. So here I am now.
Well, Trevor, you and I have known each other a while, but we didn't meet. We didn't meet in Washington. We met up in Alaska.
No, that was right. Because you started coming up to Alaska trying to find some Chinook on the Connecticut, and that's Jesus, dude. I mean, I started there in 2003. And so I'm trying to remember when the first time you came up and brought those guys up, but it's changed a bunch since then, as you know. But yeah, a lot of Alaska stuff. I really like it out there and some other places, but I don't miss the bugs. The one thing about being an Alaskan fishing guide that I really like is not getting in an airplane every day, which I used to do. It's just not for me. I'd rather be in one place and not figuring the weather out all the time, because the weather's pretty nasty, especially in the fall.
Man, I'll tell you, Alaska is a great place to visit. As you were alluding to, I was fortunate enough to be a guest instructor at Alaska West for, I think it was 7 seasons. First year I did 1 week, and the other 6 I did 2. So my experience in Alaska is limited to that as a guest. I didn't have to set up camp, didn't have to take down camp, and I didn't have to do any of the guiding. And, you talk about bugs. It's a real thing, isn't it, up there?
Yeah, it's real.
I still can't believe that Canada didn't somehow get Alaska.
Well, you know what? You guys just got to work on the negotiating skills, man. We made some pretty good buys. We bought low, and I don't think we're selling. I feel bad for you, but dude, you can always come visit. Just like I like visiting your neck of the woods too. I mean, everything's got its beauty, and it's awesome, man.
It's crazy how big Alaska is. Everyone thinks of Texas or California as being giant states, but Alaska is way bigger than them. Way bigger than BC.
That's right.
Wow.
Yep. I like how they put Alaska and Texas right next to each other to show the real scale of everything and how big actually Alaska is. And and there's so much water. I mean, they'll never find you. There's so much stuff there. And depending on where you are, depends on, like we're talking about, how bad the bugs are versus how they aren't. And depending on how many puddles are on the tundra. And Alex and I were just talking about this before you showed up, and we're talking about how to layer your clothing. So you're not too bulky and you can still move around. And then what you got to do to like kind of prep your tent before you go to sleep. Like I always bomb my tent right before dinner. And then after I get out of dinner, I come back and I open up the door. So you just have the screen door, and I open up all the windows and let it air out. And you just see all the dead bodies. Oh, it's awesome.
So Alaska is obviously very famous for trout fishing, very famous for salmon fishing. And we talked about Chinook, what you gentlemen would call kings. And that was my attraction up there. This is something I think we all share in common. We're all just addicted to Chinook and king fishing. And Alex, you and I first met because you called me up. You wanted to talk about king salmon fishing. And I was like, who is this crazy guy from Michigan? But you were pretty passionate about the fishing in your backyard too, right? You guys have some good opportunities there.
Yeah, we do. The obsession with kings, we call them Chinooks up here because we're right up by Canada. But yeah, I really don't know where the obsession for me. I love steelhead fishing as much as the next guy. But yeah, there's just something special about kings. I've got to do Atlantic salmon before, which I think is a riot. But I don't know, the first time I ever went out fly fishing, it's kind of a long story how that relationship built. But a guy finally took me out, and we were on the Pier Marquette, which because of our stocking program, it just gets a massive run, and it's not a big river. And I shouldn't admit this. It's probably where most people start, but we were kind of flossing them somewhat, like I didn't realize it at the time, swinging egg flies to fish coming in on the reds, which it's unfortunately that's a huge thing, in the Great Lakes. But just seeing them, and just the look of them and the meanness of them, and it destroyed my drag, yeah, I really wanted to go to where they're some of the best and brightest. And we just have limited opportunity in the Great Lakes to actually swing for like fresh, really silver kings. There are a couple special rivers where you can do it, but it's not the most, you get bored after a while targeting fish that are kind of spent changing, not silver, not putting on the fight, because I'm not trying to get half dead fish and put them in a smoker. I mainly just catch and release, even though they're stocked here, and I don't have an issue with keeping as long as you follow regulations. I'm just in it for the sport.
So, your flies are really how a lot of people would know you. And your fly design, to me, is very inspired by what we do out here on the West Coast, whether it be Washington, BC, or Alaska. Are you using some of those same big patterns back home?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. So for steelhead, and I'm calling them steelhead here, Great Lakes or lake run rainbows, the one thing I noticed is it must be like because they're not coming out of salt, they stay on the feed a little bit more. And so kind of matching what's in our rivers for Great Lakes fish help me out a little bit more. Like olive and copper kind of sculpin looking things, are going to outproduce more times than your classic intruders. But for some strange reason, I found with kings, especially when you can find them coming in, August time would be for us, like where you can start seeing some real silver kings. Man, a chartreuse and blue baitfish pattern, kind of like what you see out west, because even our stock kings here were brought in to feed on alewife, a herring. And so the same patterns seem to trigger kings. Wherever they're at, they stick to one primary thing. They're deep fish, and they like bait fish looking stuff. So yeah, I do use them here.
It's funny. I'll be honest with you guys. I haven't tied a fly in over a decade. It's literally probably been longer than that. And when I first got into, targeting Chinook, it was on a river called the Lillooet, which is northeast of Whistler. And I was literally trying to tie the biggest fly that I could throw. And I'm using heavy gear, and I'm a decent caster. I could throw a pretty big fly. So these early patterns are size extra large. And since then, I've dropped it down, and guiding, you tend to favor flies that people can cast. Trevor, I heard Alex say sculpin patterns, and I was laughing because sculpin patterns are a big part of what we do on Squamish as well as the Skeena. Not asking you to give away your secrets, but when you're out there targeting steelhead or targeting trout in Alaska or fishing for kings, are you fishing the classic blue and chartreuse stuff, or are you mixing it up?
Well, I think I mixed up depend on the time of year. whether it be early season and I'm close to the beach versus later season when there's more sunlight and lower water. Then the next thing, like, I can't really speaking on sculpin fishing, speaking on Chinook fishing. Those are two different things. I could talk for a day on each of these things, right? But as far as Chinook are concerned, like you were talking about, you used to make the biggest flies you could, which is the same thing I did when I first started. And it's mainly because I used to watch Chinook eat K14 quickfish, right? Which is a giant plug. Okay. They'll smoke it.
So Trevor, just quick question for people that are listening and aren't familiar with that plug. How long would a plug like that be?
Oh, shoot. At least 7, sometimes 8 inches. Depends on the size of it. And so I would run what was called, so I started out fishing quick fish, which are essentially has a bill on the front of it, and you put 2 rods out and they wiggle like this in the current, and what I did is you'd set up in the current in the trough, and then you would you look at the bank next to you and you just try and creep down the bank as slow as you can. And as the current hits the plugs, they dive, right? And they move, they rattle, they have all kinds of stuff. And I'm not a rod holder guy. Like, I used to make my clients hold on to the rods because it's the next best thing to swinging flies as far as actually feeling a takedown, because some are pretty savage sometimes. But what happens is your rod tip does this, and that's when the plug's working really good. Well, then it starts to get kind of nervous, right? When it starts getting nervous, there's essentially, if you have a fish that's sitting in front of a plug, it's going to mess with the hydraulics around that plug, and it's going to make your rod tip do funny things. And sometimes what happens is the fish eats it. Well, your rod tip goes all the way up and almost slack because they've eaten it and they've lunged forward with it. But now they're going to turn, and then it essentially just buries, or it just fucking buries. It's unbelievable. Like, my father lost a rod in the Connecticut River doing it once because he was holding it. We were down by an area called Whitewater, turning the corner there, right above the ocean. And he's drinking his coffee, just doing what he usually does. And yeah, fish just nailed it right out of his hand. He had no chance. So, oops.
Wow.
That's good living.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I mean, in my limited experience, I was really interested in, Chinook and kings coming in wild, on the rivers out west on the Skeena and on the Katak. And my observation thus far is, aside from time of year and not technically being in their, natal or wild streams, kings in the Great Lakes are very similar, so sometimes in figuring out how to target them here, I would look up simple stuff like lures, or what do they use out west, and some of our rivers, you get a few that come in early and maybe they were natural reproduction. And, I shouldn't admit this, but I tried tying up just anything that looks like a bait fish, real flashy, but something like completely unweighted, like so almost on a tube so it floats, but like on a heavy sink tip. And I'd even tie like a crappie rattle, on the tube. But the thing was, I was trying to figure it out because I would see guys use thunder sticks or those lure Jensen quick fish, and I'm like, man, they're getting a reaction here out of them. There's something about the way it's shaking and like just triggering in them. So I tried, doing it the other way where, everything's real sinking, but long leader floating, and just like strip, lift the rod up so it kind of hovers like that. And all of a sudden I started catching them. And so I've come to the conclusion that Chinook pretty much act like Chinook in any river system. Their diet and what triggers them, albeit there's nuances in each river, timing and stuff like that, I suppose. But I mean, we've had it Lake Superior tribs and stuff where they tend to reproduce the best. They're smaller, but they're actually wild in the sense, and that's a lot of fun because you can target them on the swing, and you can be swinging certain colors and nothing's going on, and you put on like that chartreuse and blue and some flash, and doesn't have to be huge, but it's definitely a little bit more profile. And we've seen it in super clear water where they almost hit it like a shark. It's not even like feeding as much as it is. You finally get a reaction out of these fish. You're swinging stuff by them and they're just sitting there. And all of a sudden you swing something like that in and one darts away and the other just comes in and is like mean on it or whatever. So I found that interesting myself. But
dude, speaking of takes, Trevor, I got to say your social media is bonkers with the Alaskan stuff.
I dialed it back quite a bit for some reasons. Yeah, absolutely. But like I used to live for that. That is essentially what I'd call the first 30 seconds of mayhem, which is the thing I love.
Well, for those that were lucky enough to see it, to literally watch the take happen in front of you and the angler flail under good direction sometimes, but often, have things work out for them. Yeah, it's crazy to me how a Chinook eat looks so much different on video than a steelhead take does.
They're not the same in any degree. And just like, that's why I explain to people like all these fish are individuals to a certain degree, meaning some will nibble at it, some will eat it nice and slow. There's that one take that I'm sure you've seen where I'm at a essentially real level. And I mean, we're right above the ocean and that fish was spawned in hell. I mean, from the eat to when we tried to let it go, it was just a whole different fucking fish, man. I mean, angry, vindictive. I would say vindictive, just the way what it did, because that fish ate it. And like my SD card ran out of memory partway into that, so we missed some of the best stuff because after it ate, it ran upstream. You heard the line tearing as it went upstream, and then it did a 180-degree turn, and its back was halfway out of the water, going all the way back downstream, way back down below where the fish ate it originally. And that was a spot that we used to just call Honey Hole. It was a deep tank. It was a place where I remember right before that happened, there was a group of seagulls in the tail out. They were dive bombing the tail out and eating hooligan as they were coming up, because we get a small hooligan run there, not as big as the Connect Talk, but it's just wild, man. And but you never know what you're gonna get. And then it also, I think, depends also where you are on the river. For example, you tie up with a Chinook on the Dean, it's probably going to act a little differently than some other places where you're going to hook up to a Chinook, just because you got a lot of flow,
Yeah, on the Dean, it's the gradient, like you say, because the river below the canyon is still really pool rapid in a few spots. So I remember one fish in particular, and if I can find a photo, I'll actually put it in the website comments. But this fish grabbed my fly so far back in the tail out, like on the convex bit, like a back end steelhead eat. And then it just drained me, and we hopped back in the boat, chased it down probably 1.5 kilometers of river, and I landed that sucker right at the mouth of the river. So that was really neat. But that same fish in the Connect Talk or the Skeena might have done something totally different, just because the Dean's so steep.
Yeah, because they usually don't. In my experience, they don't really leave the spot much. When they do, they're either it's just a superb fish or it's really large. And usually at a certain point, they eventually get out in the current, it takes them down. And then your problem becomes the root wads and the tundra clumps, right? Because you can pick up and chase the fish. So you go and pick up and you chase your fish. Some guy that's been wanting the spot you've been in all day, well, he's going to go and take that spot. And then you get halfway down, your fish gets wrapped up in a root wad, and you just lost your whole Skagit head, or your hook's bent out, or you land like a 50-pound Chinook. It's heartbreaking. It's awesome, but that's why we do it.
Speaking of big Chinook, you guys recently see some of those fish out of Chile and Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Trevor, I know you guided down in Chile. I as well guided in Chile, but my guiding was for trout. But I have this one memory of going on the Futalefu River. And I'd been told that there were Chinook there, but I had never seen one. And I was drifting down the river, and there was this kind of sturdy couple on the bank waving at me. Like I thought something was wrong. So I rowed over there, and they wanted to show me this big fish that they caught. And it was a 45-pound fish caught on the coffee can setup.
Yep.
It wasn't chrome bright silver by any means, but it was big news. And I think it actually ended up being displayed in a local restaurant. But a 45-pound king salmon while you're on a coffee can, it was pretty neat. Do you think, Trevor, in your experience there, do they have the capacity to grow triple-digit fish?
Triple-digit? Well, I mean, It depends on a lot of factors, but they have all the right factors, meaning there's no commercial fishery for them. The way their rivers are essentially set up, not a lot of predation at all. Okay, there's like I saw a couple sea lions down there on the Rio Paleno, but down closer to the mouth. Okay, and the next thing you have, and this is the most important thing, is if you look at the bug life that they have in South America, where I was at, Chile, you have one of the largest populations of stoneflies and other bugs of anywhere, and then really clean water. So great for the little ones, right? The little ones can grow up in a great place where they got a lot of stuff to snack on, and you know, I'm guessing the brown trout and the rainbow trout will do a little bit of damage on that. But the next thing that I would see too is that when those Chinook would finally start to set up and spawn, what I didn't see a bunch of fish behind them looking for eggs like we do in Alaska, because and I'll give you an example of this. I was with my boss at the time, and we were standing on a bridge, and there was 2 Chinook spawning, and there was a female digging and a male just hanging out, and it was right above this rapid. And every time the female would dig, these huge brown trout would come out of this rapid, and the male would chase them around for, you know, and they'd go right back into the whitewater and they'd disappear, and the male would circle back around. And I'm sitting there going, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to tie on this bead here, and I'm going to huck a bead right in this spawning bed to see if I can get one of these trout. And I tried, and we hooked nothing. And then it occurred to me that the females are knocking stoneflies off the rocks, and the trout are coming and eating stoneflies. And
nice.
Because that's their natural thing. I mean, they're not. I think if you give it a little bit more time, they're going to eventually make their way over to start eating the eggs. But in my experience, I thought that most of the brown trout would clear out of some of those sections once the Chinook came in and started spawning. Like there was a time, there's a river down there called the Manuelos, which we had some great brown trout fishing on one week, and then came back there when there was more Chinook in the system. We really didn't see many brown trout after that. And either they moved on or it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but they were just really not there. And it wasn't that much time in between.
Those South American Chinooks are crazy cool looking fish, though, eh? With big shoulders.
They're huge. They're super big, and it's usually a cowlitz and a clam strain of spring Chinook. Essentially, they're super hard to catch, especially on a fly. You can do it; it's extremely tough. Now, if I went down there and set up a plug outfit, I mean, you would just crush them. And they're unbelievable fish. And depending on where you are in the country, what time of year, it kind of depends on the condition they're going to be in, right? So like I would get down there in November, right? And we'd start catching them in November and December. Dude, we caught some absolute magnum black and white fish. I mean, you've seen a couple of those photos. I mean, I remember I was holding one. I think I was either 19 or 21 at the time, but I could barely hold the thing up, and I thought I was a pretty strong dude. And the adipose was the size of my fist. You know, it was one of those, and it was mean. Such a mean fish, but really, really hard to get on a fly, because I know there's guys that are promoting that, but it's not a walk in the park. Don't think you're going to go down there and just smoke a bunch of fish, because you're not. It's more of a quality experience and trying to get and seeing a different side of the culture, and you're going to drink a bunch of great wine. You're going to see some really cool landscape, but you were going to have to fish.
Do they have an ocean fishery for those fish down there yet? Like, you know how off the west coast of BC, Washington, Alaska?
Not that I know of. And if anything, I believe it's going to be some form of bycatch, you know, because they're usually just fishing for other stuff. And I mean, the only native fish for example, to Chile in fresh water is a puye, okay, which is a really small bait fish. I mean, none of the trout there are native whatsoever. I mean, one of the streams we used to fish out of Kuyaki, I mean, those were fish that were brought down from the McCloud River, you know, out of California. Like, you know, the Germans, when they started coming into South America, I mean, I'm sure they brought some stuff over. And then, but it's kind of jumped. And, you know, when I first started fishing down there, I was telling people, I'm like, you guys give this 20 years and this is going to be kicking the shit out of Alaska. And the numbers are there, but it's just not, it's not the same place, you know.
It's interesting. Rural Chile and Argentina, there's a few Germans down there, isn't there?
Yeah. I wonder why, but they're there. That's why, I mean, it's a lot of wonderful looking women down there, especially in Argentina and stuff like that. But like some of the guys I worked with, some Chileans, I mean, they had German last names, you know, and you can see some of the architecture still there in a lot of places, but we can all venture a guess why. And then, but it's a super cool place, a super cool country. Like I really love the people, you know. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school and I didn't pay attention worth anything, but I learned more just hitchhiking around and trying to hang out with those people than I ever did in a classroom setting or on a framing crew here. So
nice. Well, I just did the one season, and for me, I was a young kid. It was like early 90s, maybe mid 90s. And I found the travel for me at that time stressful because it was really remote. To get to Fu was basically a multi-day journey. And
it sucks.
Yeah. Cool part of the world, people so nice. And just, I'm with you. I think that fishery is only going to get better. Alex, your neck of the woods is, I've told you this before, you know, there's a lot of states I don't have a ton of interest in, but
Yeah.
Michigan is a place that I've always said, I got to get there at some point and check it out. And I think part of it is your geography is really unique. And, you know, you go right up into the middle of Lake Superior there in northern Michigan, and you're way further north than people are in most of Ontario there, right?
Yeah, I mean, where I live is, I think, north of like 80% of the Canadian population. Although that statistic, as true as it is kind of deceiving because you can go pretty far up north, you know, and into Canada, into Arctic circles. So that, but yeah, we do live. I think the majority of the population kind of starts coming down into Toronto, Montreal, both really nice cities too, and even Calgary to some, I think might be, it's pretty close on that line. So
my neck of the woods here, we call this northern BC. I'm of course in Terrace, BC, but if you look at it, we're like literally halfway up the province. So we're really the middle. And once again, the great state of Alaska is a big one, and it stretches quite a way south. We can get to Alaska from here in like 4.5 hours to like Hyder.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of Alaska and BC. There's just so much, you know, as Trevor was saying. If you look at like, and Texas is huge, man. Like if you've ever tried driving across it, I mean, it's like, I swear, I drove all across it one time to El Paso. It was a long time ago, 20 years maybe, to see a concert.
I got to ask, what was the concert?
The Reverend Horton Heat, actually. Rockabilly band's pretty good. But anyway, point being is, man, you just would not believe how long, and this was before iPhones and stuff, so we knew how to read a road atlas, and I failed to realize when you get, because every state, you know, is the same measurement except Texas and Alaska. And of course, I'd never driven through Alaska. So the actual inch equals this many miles, like doubles for Texas. And I didn't realize that. But anyway, it takes hours and hours and hours and hours to drive across, and you're halfway there. And then you look at Texas or Alaska compared to Texas. And it's kind of mind boggling, really. You know, you could probably spend 20 years going up to Alaska and just see a fraction of what's available, you know.
No steelhead in Texas, though.
No.
I want to shift focus here and talk steelhead for a little bit. We up here in Terrace, we're getting ready for our winter steelhead season, or spring steelhead, as some people call it. Of course, for people listening, the Skeena has essentially two types of steelhead. You've got steelhead that we call summer steelhead that arrive in the river from mid-July through late November, and those are fish that are going to overwinter in the river and spawn in the spring. But we also get what we call winter steelhead, and these fish come back with the first little bit of a water bump in the spring. So our best fishing is typically mid-March through any part of April, right up until freshet. And these fish don't tend to go as far up the Skeena, so they'll come in and they'll end up spawning in the lower tribs with pretty similar timing to the summer run fish upstream. Trevor, I know you guys, your winter steelhead fishing is pretty much in full swing right now, isn't it, down there in Washington?
Yeah, we got a big chunk of rain last night, so the river went from 5 5,500 CFS to 22,000 CFS. So I'm not fishing today. I'm going to be tying some flies and watching football. The playoffs are today. So, but it's no, we are in full swing here. It's been exceptional so far. I would say, I think we were talking the other day, but it's one of the better seasons as far as start offs that I've had in since forever, since before a big brood stocking program we used to have here on the Soul Duck River. But the conditions have been lining up really good, but it's been great. Hooked a couple really big fish, but there's a ton of I would say your 6 to 10 pound fish coming up right now. And right now there's and they're all making it to the spawning areas and all the tribs because the water's so big. So
nice. You know what? You and I have talked before. A lot of folks, especially new steelheaders, tend to buy into this idea that historically the rivers were full of fish, and that the fishing that we have these days in the last decade is not nearly as good as what was enjoyed by people much older than us. But I think the reality is these runs, they go up and down, and even throughout the year. Some years you have early fish, other years fish are later, and you never really know unless you're out there. So I think that there's something special about fishing the early season. Well, when I was in Squamish, or Whistler and Squamish, we used to pick on the Vancouver people a little bit, because the Vancouver people would often wait until they heard that fishing was good, and then they would drive up from the city and make the river crowded and fishing wasn't good anymore. But if you were willing to get out there on the front end or the back end of the storm as the river was just about to go out or just coming back in, those were the days. And I get a sense, Trevor, that's kind of the fishing you're doing down there, isn't it?
I roll my eyes at like all the crap I have to hear. And yeah, well, I mean, I do. It gets annoying at some point, because like I had a guy in Alaska this year. He went to do a king season. He's like, yeah, I used to fish Peninsula all the time, but since what's happened down there, like I really don't go down there. And I'm like, what's happened? What happened down there? And he's like, well, yeah, I hear that all the steelhead are gone. I'm like, man, dude, I did pretty good last year. And I turned to my buddy Ryan, who's also a guy down there. I'm like, Ryan, how was your season? He was like, pretty good, right? And that's kind of like some of the reasons I do get kind of vocal, is because I'm tired of seeing the certain publications being able to say what they want about this place without spending any time here. And so, by the way, that same guy that I talked to, he booked a trip with me down here, and he just left, and we average a few fish a day, and he got smoked by a couple fish, and he's like, and of course he's coming back next year because there are fish here. But it helps to have a fishing guide who knows the water. Like you can't just stroll up here and try to be successful. It happens sometimes, but like the water fluctuation here and how our rivers change a lot, like you can't just go to the same place. And so that's essentially what I'm dealing with here, is essentially dealing with people and publications that have been telling me for the last, essentially, I would say it's really ramped up the last 5 to 6 years about how I'm catching the last steelhead here. And I've been catching the last steelhead, multiple times a week, and they keep changing size and color and all this stuff. And they're pretty heavy on trying to shut down the, of course, my area, that's their whole thing. They really want this whole place shut down. Of course, I'll see them the next weekend after a couple fish show up on social media. I'll go and talk to them. I'll be like, you guys must be on a twilight tour. You can't be out here fishing because you were trying to shut this place down last week. And they're like, oh, no, that wasn't true. I'm like, well, it's on video. Got it. I can show it to you right now. And so I keep receipts on that kind of stuff. But it's pretty annoying on that stent, because we still have a pretty good run here. And they've always got us kind of backed up to a cliff on where they're going to shut us down and whatnot. And then, but you never hear about Oregon getting shut down or some of these other places. And like I said, our numbers here have been pretty good. But the narrative is there's no steelhead. And I'm not saying we shouldn't help steelhead in any way, because I'm the biggest advocate for wild steelhead you'll find, because I've manicured my entire life around these fish. But you cannot tell me you are for helping these fish while essentially you're trying to kick me and other people like me to the curb, and without also giving essentially the gill nets a free pass. So what they've done here is they've shut down certain ends of the season to sport fishing, and then they open up a commercial fishing season, right? And so, which I find pretty countering to trying to build, like, I look at steelhead and steel populations like a long-term investing account, right? So if you have a good year, maybe you shouldn't like loosen up on some regs and stuff like that. And maybe like we should keep some netting days down so we build interest over time, right? Because if we try and stay flat the whole time when we have all the environmental stuff that's going on as well. And like Brian says, like every year, the water conditions and the run size, they fluctuate. And steelhead, they have no programming. They come in exactly when they want, whether the water temperature's right, the size levels, stuff like that, and whether they can even get in their tribs. And on the low years, they're not really getting in those tribs much at all. And so you see a lot more, mainstream spawning, which people will be like, oh, there's a ton of fish spawning. Well, it's because they can't get up to their other stuff, right? I'd go on and on. I'll stop.
No, dude, keep going. That's why you're here. I think that the thing that is a little bit scary is kind of the feedback loop on that. And that is the crisis narrative gets politicians' attention. Politicians don't know what to do with it. And quite frankly, regardless of what side of the border you're on, I think it's an intimidating topic because there's so many players, there's so much to learn. And for a politician, they just don't have the time to do a deep dive on that. So, they love to sign the check and have the press release and put the money out there. But when it comes time to do something with the money, what's to be done? And what we found up here, and I think this is probably accurate in the States too, is you have a variety of NGOs that have gotten really good at coming up with a business plan to capture some of that available funding. And that available funding is a direct result of the public believing there's this huge problem that somehow needs to be fixed. How are we going to fix it? Here's the folks with the plan, send the money, look at what we're doing. The organization probably has a logo. It might look like a fish, perhaps. A lot of people who like to fish support these things because they want to feel like they're making a difference, but they maybe don't understand how much of that money is going to payroll for that particular NGO or what their actual deliverables are, how many extra fish are going to make it to the spawning beds, how many extra fishing licenses could be sold. Access and opportunity is a really important thing. Up here, we refer to it as the waterbed effect. Alex, if we close one of your rivers, all the people that still want to go fish, they go somewhere else. You create crowding in other spots. So the waterbed effect is a real problem when it comes to closed fisheries. The three most solid arguments that I personally would make for keeping anglers on the water, well, of course, trying to manage them in a way to minimize their impact, would be one, having law-abiding anglers on the water dissuades poaching. This is evidenced, at least up here, by every time they catch a poacher, it's because an angler reported them. That's what happens. Second thing is, you got to have folks out there engaged knee-deep in the river to appreciate things and understand the value of clean water, wild fish. These are the folks that show up when it's time to fight an industrial project that might be damaging or damming something that shouldn't be dammed. And then I think the third one is probably the most important. And that's this idea that if we keep anglers on the water and engaged, we keep value within the fishery. And when we're dealing with politics and perhaps fighting big projects that might be damaging, it's important to have, anglers who understand. And this, I guess, falls also into the scientific argument. If you want to know how many fish are in the river, best way to find out is the people that are out there fishing, especially people that fish it all the time, consistently. You want to know where the fish are, they know. So I'm going on, guys, but this is a passionate thing for me because it bothers me to see people lose access and opportunity when it's not backed by science. Alex, you guys are lucky. You got lots of places to fish, don't you?
Yeah, I just want to comment. I mean, I really appreciate your guys' perspective. Both of you make a living and are passionate about doing it. I can't say the same for myself. So I really like hearing and listening to you guys. One thing that I have noticed is one, everybody's an expert in this. So you have to be careful where you get your information. Everybody seems to know the answer, like you can go on any forum and get all kinds of information. One thing that I have noticed, and I think you made a really good point, Brian, and I sense it with you too, Trevor, is there's a misnomer, right? Where people say, well, Brian Niska, Trevor, they're guides, so they're biased, so they just want it open and stuff. Everybody has a bias, right? And yeah, right. So they say, well, it's about money. Well, here's the catch. Every decision ever made at any level of government is always about follow the dollar trail, and you'll know why something was done. Just about every time. What I will say, and I've noticed this with hunting, and I used to spend a lot of time in the woods till I discovered spey fishing. Now I do, but I just don't have the same drive to hunt. But regardless, the people that I know that spend the most time wildlife management, out there hunting, killing animals, they are actually the ones who care the most about that system. And you'll have people on the other side who are so anti killing animals, even though they're not vegetarian. So I'm like, well, and that's a whole nother discussion. And they think that because we're killing animals, that we don't care about the animals. And I'm like, actually, these people probably care more about the animal's livelihood and can actually give you information. I don't want to digress too much, and you guys know way more about it than I do, but we have a huge wolf population again in the UP. It almost became endangered. Well, it was. They got put on the endangered list. And I can tell you, all my life growing up in the UP, I hardly ever saw them. I see more wolves now out there. I mean, I personally carry a firearm now, too. They're a very curious animal. They're not afraid of people. And we cannot manage the wolf population up here because the majority of the population of Michigan is not even up here in the UP. And they're like, oh, killing wolves is so bad. And I'm just using this as an example. And it does sound bad in a sense, like, right, it's a beautiful animal. Why would you want to kill it? And the problem is the people who are actually in the woods hunting, and I'm drawing a parallel to the people who make a living guiding, what is going to happen is it's going to be catastrophic to the wolves. They're going to eat themselves out of house and home. Apex predator, can't be managed. Our deer counts are going to go way down. It's going to affect the whole thing, and it's going to be really, really terrible. And the whole opposition to it is, oh, you guys just want to kill wolves. And it's like, no, we actually want wildlife to thrive in the UP. And I see similar parallels to people who are professionals in the fly fishing industry. There's just this mindset that they are only about money and they only want to be able to go catch their fish and they don't care about anything else. And I've never found that to be the case with people who are really on the boots and in it. And so I appreciate your guys' opinion and respect it a lot more than people on the outside. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for the kind words there, Alex. I don't know about Trevor, but yeah, we're just dripping in cash with this fishing guide stuff.
Oh, dude, just crushing it. No, I think that, what was said to me last year by one of these people we were just talking about is taking advantage of a public resource. That's the one thing that gets essentially thrown in my face a lot by some of these guys. And I've told plenty of people this, like, if I went out there and I wasn't catching nothing, I would sit there and go, man, maybe I'm a failure. And so guess what? Then I get on the phone and I call my gear buddies who are really good at catching fish. And it's just a better way to catch them. And I'm going, man, you guys, like, how you guys doing this weekend? If they were like, man, we haven't hooked anything. There's nothing going on. Dude, sound the alarm, okay? I'd be like, look, we got to shut the season down, blah, 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 blah. But I have everything written down from when I started guiding till now, and my numbers do not fluctuate unless it has something to do with water conditions, like high water. Like 2 years ago, we had no water here. Most of the season, they end up shutting it down in March.
Every good fly fishing guide needs some trusted gear buddies, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Well, dude, it's like, and the thing is, like, especially when it comes to steelheading, like, that's how I started steelhead fishing. I was using bait. I love fishing sand shrimp. It was awesome. The cutthroat couldn't, like, nibble on it, and I didn't have to throw borax on stuff, and fishing was super good. And then, like, usually you kind of start making a progression, and I started swinging flies, and that was freaking sweet, right? But like what Alex was saying, we have the same issue with, like, let's talk about sea lions at the mouth of the Columbia. Okay, well, they're right below a dam. Everybody's like, don't kill the sea lions. Well, there's a sea lion covering all the docks down there. Okay. And so now when the sea lions smack all the endangered salmon and steelhead that are going to be going up the river, right? Then what are they going to eat after that? Well, they're going to start smacking the sturgeon next. Okay. And you see what I'm saying? It's going to roll out and roll out and roll out. And then, everything's paved. Like, what's the saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we're trying to protect their food source. Just like you can talk about the wolves all over the Western states. Like, of course, the hunters are vocal about, they're seeing all the elk, like, essentially go away, right? Where they had certain numbers of elk in Idaho in 1 year. And now you look at what they are, right? Like, they're built to hunt shit and kill shit. And they're still not as crafty as, like, for example, a mountain lion. Like, they've been watching or they've been documenting wolves now falling around mountain lions because mountain lions are super proficient at killing stuff. And so a mountain lion will now just kill something. And so the wolves will get off their ass so they can go hunt in peace. Right.
So the sea lion issue, which I can only speak about and draw a parallel to, issues that I've seen, is actually managing them, which means, having a season and being able to kill some of them is actually going to benefit their population. And an argument that you hear in all spheres of whether it's fishing or hunting and wildlife management is, well, why can't we just let nature do its thing? And the problem with that is because we're here and involved with it, we would all have to go off the grid. There could be no commercial fishing. There could be no, anything for, I don't know, half a century. And that's just not a viable solution. A much better one is wildlife management. And I understand the difficulty of that concept. Killing things saves things, but
it's important to acknowledge, how we interact with wildlife, because it's a fair comment to say, let the ecosystem do its thing and the predators do the whole fox and rabbits thing. But the rules change when you build that dam, or the rules change if you have a fishery with nets, right? Hey, the rules change even sport fishing. I'm going to give you a quick example. If you talk to a saltwater fishing guide, someone say mooching off of Haida Gwaii, they'll tell you that in the last decade, they have more problems with sea lions stealing their salmon. So it's a learned behavior where the sea lions have said, hey, oh, look, there's a boat. We'll follow those guys around. Oh, they got a fish. We'll go take their fish, because that's easier than trying to catch the fish on our own. So when we do things like that to essentially set the fish up to be taken by the predator, I think there needs to be something in balance, whatever that looks like. Up here on the Skeena and the Nass, there are indigenous hunters who now are taking sea lions. I guess they've been taking sea lions for a long time. And perhaps there's a commercial product down the road for that. I'm not sure if it's being sold that way or not. And honestly, I don't know if I'd eat sea lion.
I think we ground it up and put it in dog food, man.
Sounds great.
Give the chum a break. Like Brian's saying, like, once we've come, like humans, once we've gone so far, it's really hard for us to take a step back. So essentially there is no going back, but we were smart enough to get this far. We're smart enough to be able to make some changes to do the right thing. And as Brian said, like the first thing is, like, there is a man-made structure that is stopping all those fish from doing their thing, and just hang out in front of the fish ladder or follow the boat around. Okay. And they do the same thing in Cabo San Lucas when they're trying to get tuna and stuff like that. They got sea lions down there doing the same thing. And where it's, there's not enough natural predators for a sea lion. If you've ever been close to a big bull sea lion, like, they're scary, like, especially in the water. I mean, it's a sea lion. There's not a lot that's going to mess with those things. Talk to some scuba divers.
We have a species that I don't remember the year it got here or how long, cormorant. Mm-hmm. And it's a very prehistoric looking kind of bird, right? Looks like a mini pterodactyl. They're kind of cool. They do not have predators here. And I have watched them, on the St. Mary's River right below the dams in water that's so just, I mean, it's just so heavy and the current is so torrential that you couldn't even swim in it. It's amazing that fish do. And I've watched the cormorants dive down and come out with 3-pound rainbow trout and just swallow them one after another. And they're devastating to our river system. I don't know who came up with it, but there was a open season on them where you could just go and wipe them out. And it broke a lot of people's hearts. But we had no other option, for these cormorants. They were just devastating the fish, and it helps to keep the population in check. The side note to that is it also generates income, though too. It's another stamp. It's another fun hunting experience and stuff like that. So it's not as bad as what people think to have wildlife management, but.
No, you're not trying to decimate them. You're trying to save them from themselves, essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Alex, you're a bit of a hunter before a fisherman. Michigan, snobby West Coast skier here. Absolutely. But Michigan's got a little ski hill that I've been following on social media. And, man, that place just looks like a fun time. I believe it's called Mount Bohemia.
Mount Bohemia, yeah.
Up north of you, isn't it?
It is about 3.5 hours. It's nestled 6 hours. My wife says 6 hours. It's way up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, which jets right up into Lake Superior. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. So if you like wilderness and old growth forests, then it's the closest thing that I have seen out here that reminds me of being in just beautiful places out west, save mountains. It's this huge looking inland sea and rolling hills and old trees, and it's quite nice. So yeah, the skiing's good.
Are you a skier?
No, I tried snowboarding a couple times and was never good at it. I'm not sure why I never jumped into it. So I was lazy. I'd get on a tube and just fly down a hill, and that's bad. So I'm
the tube can be uncontrollable at a certain speed. It's scary, especially when you hit a little knob and then everybody flies off the tube. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So it's a good adrenaline rush. So my dad, we used to go out. He's just always been an outdoorsman, really good, really patient, just really observant. And we've always lived, the UP is country in and of itself. So even if you live in town, you're 5 minutes away from just, pretty much raw wilderness. And we used to, in the wintertime, cross country ski back into these lagoons and ponds. And we had these blow dart guns, that you can't really hunt anything. But as a kid, you thought you could. And so that's the extent of my skiing, is a lot of cross country in the wilderness in the wintertime.
So, within the bucket and doing these shows and talking to people, one thing that has come up quite a bit is a lot of the folks that are really into steelhead fishing are really into skiing and snowboarding. Some in a professional sense. We've had some professional skiers and snowboarders on here who really have jumped into fly fishing. And I think that part of that is when you spend your time up on the mountain, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to be happening in the river. And of course, steelhead fishing, as Trevor was saying earlier, water conditions are everything. So I think that a lot of times you have folks that really enjoy being up on the mountain who also enjoy being down in the valley fishing. Trevor, you said you were into skiing and snowboarding. Were you a skier or a snowboarder?
I started out skiing, and then I gravitated to snowboarding because that was the cool thing to do. Like once you got a little older, right? So my dad would break my brother and I out of school like halfway through the day on a Friday, and he always took us up to it was Snoqualmie Pass, and we'd do the night skiing because there was barely anybody up there for the night skiing versus the weekend, and then also it was cheaper. My dad had like even older, like I'd try and scam the lift ticket people out of there and try and tell them that I was like, 7 years old when I was 12, kind of thing, and so I skied and snowboarded a lot, but it's a lot of like what you're saying, the comparisons and why I think it's kind of gravitated towards those people is it's the same thing. It's a condition based deal. Like there's somebody right now calling some guy on the mountain going, how much powder fell last night? Just like I get sometimes 10 to 15 calls on a certain day asking what the river's doing, what are the roads like over there and stuff like that. You know, trying for people that are either trying to come out here or not. Now, as much as I'd love to put a blown out river picture up every other day to keep some people away from it. There's some people I really love and I give a fair shake to. And if it's on, it's on. I'm like, hey, if you're coming out here, you should probably be over in this direction, like, and it might bode well for you. So I'll drop little hints and stuff like that without giving too much away. Right.
So I know that, like, working at a shop before, having a shop,
yeah,
you always get pumped for information. And part of the deal is you have to give up some information. So you need to have a place where you can direct people to that is going to give them the opportunity they're looking for, but isn't going to, upset a bunch of other people. It's tricky. You need to kind of have those places to help people out and not be a real jerk about it. But it is funny to me, like skiing, my favorite skiing to do is skiing in a storm. My favorite fishing to do is as the river's changing, right? As it's coming back in. It's such the best feeling in the world to be out there and go, man, it's a little bit murky right now. And then a couple hours later, it starts to look good. And there's nobody out there yet because they're waiting to hear it's good. So yeah, that's a favorite thing for me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of right before a storm hits land, because you can be in there and the river can be super low and there's a little change in pressure. And I feel like there's some times when the fish feel that and they know something's coming, right? And they'll shoot anyway, even though the water's not big. You know what I'm saying? Because I've had a couple times where they're sitting down there in low water and all of a sudden you just start, and it's usually in a time where there hasn't been water for a bit. That's when I really notice it. And you'll start to see a lot of fish starting to move. I mean, they're moving pretty fast. I mean, they're trying to get up there versus like when you're talking about when the water changes, when it starts to drop and starts to get groovy again. There's some times I've gone out there and just hit a ghost town, right? And what I find too is a lot of times on those drops after a really big high water, I catch plenty of kelts too, because those fish have essentially gone up, they've spawned, and they're already coming back out within some of these fish, like out where I'm at, they can come in and spawn and go back out a few days later. They're not going to sit and hang out for months at a time. Like our rivers are too short. They're just not built that way. Some fish will sit and hang out in here for a month, but
that's interesting. Squamish is similar, right? Squamish, you're fishing very close to the ocean versus up here on the Skeena where, yeah, okay, we're fairly close to the ocean, but fairly close is like 60 miles or whatever, right? So it's a slightly different scenario.
Yeah, pretty awesome. But like you're saying, very condition based. Time of year depends on what you're kind of hoping for. Earlier you're probably going to get a lot more water. Chance of blowouts pretty good. Later in the season, you're going to see more fair weather people, more fishermen in general.
You ever fishing surface bugs when the water warms up a little bit in the spring?
No. At a certain point in the time here, the fish will start eating bobbers. I've seen them eat a few bobbers out here of some gear guys. But they're already hard enough to catch. So no, not for winter fish. Not to mention the fish that I want to catch is not going to be on the surface, dude. There's no way. They're going to sit in different lies. Like I want a shot at the champ. I really do. Like that's a big reason why I'm out here. And the thing I tell people, and that's why I'm super weird with my gear. I fish weird shit. And I'm checking my knots and my leader. I'm checking my drag and stuff because those fish just show up and they'll be like the size of the bumper on your truck. Okay. And it could be the guy that's fished 30 years, or it could be some granny that's just picked up a spey rod. And they just show up and you don't know how it's going to go, but it's usually all hell breaks loose, because now you have something that's bigger than most things you've ever seen. And then also once those people see that thing, their eyes gloss over and then their hearing goes away. Right. Mm-hmm. And they essentially try and force things, they cup the reel they start running around like a madman, and it affects people differently, right? But you never know when your next cast is going to be the biggest fish you've ever seen, or the biggest fish I've ever seen. Like I'm still looking for some cool stuff out here too. Like I've seen some great fish come out of here, but there's always another one, or one that will just, like I said, kick the shit out of your guy. Really, I'm all about that. I love it. I root for it. I like him to win too, but I also like to see a good ass kicking.
Are you a click and pawl guy or a disc drag guy?
Oh, so I'm mostly a drag guy. It kind of depends on the system I'm at. Like, so I've been on camera talking some smack for a long time about dragless reels, and now I will fish one recreationally, but I don't feel good fishing them in certain places. Like there are certain steelhead I guide for, which I have no problem with a click and paw reel. Shoot, 6 weight, have at it. But when you have a river that is moving quickly, and then you have log jams all over the place and stuff like that, I don't think it's smart. I think it's like casting to a bonefish while there's 3 sharks circling around it. Essentially, it's you're doomed for failure in certain places, and also it also depends on who's holding the rod too, because I think there's some people out there. I'm not saying all people who buy them because they look super cool. They're storied reels. They don't really know how to use them, right? And then like there was a guy who really likes using those for Chinook up where I'm at, which I really don't. I'm really not a big fan of at all. In fact, I kind of give him a ton of shit about it. And he's pretty adamant about using it. And I remember it was either first or second Chinook he hooked with me. It not only kicked his ass, but then with the zero control of it, it just went around the corner and got in the snags. So I had to go chase it, right? And now all his stuff's all in the snags, and of course we never got that fish back. And it was like, I think it was 2 years later, he had finally landed a Chinook on a click and pawl, right? Reel. And he was so excited. He was like, see, it can be done. And I go, dude, I netted your fish 100 yards away. The fish had literally gone all the way down the river, and there was like a spill off where it had gone over this spill off, and it was in this little side like slough, just like, on the drop off on its side. And I like scooped it. I'm like, dude, that was not a win. You did not win that one, like, at all. And by the way, this took longer than it should. That's kind of the next thing why I'm not a huge fan of them sometimes, because people have a tendency to give them too much. There is such thing as playing a fish for too long. And I think it's pretty irresponsible. And if you're a catch and release fisherman, your first objective is to make sure the fish swims away, right? Like, not to hear the sound of your reel. Oh, do you hear the sound? Like, oh my God.
So it's crazy, the popularity of click and pawl reels. Obviously fun things to fish with, and it's very popular to find a real old one.
Yeah.
Some could make the argument that if you go and you buy a bunch of old Hardy reels, that's actually an investment that's going to go up in value, right? So, it's obviously something that is very popular. I tend to fish nothing but, I have click and pawls, but I tend to fish nothing on the Skeena but disc drag reels. In particular, I'm using a reel from Islander that's designed for saltwater mooching and trolling. It's got a sealed cork drag. The thing is a tank. And people say, why do you want your reel a little bit heavy and so big? I said, well, if I hook the fish that Trevor's talking about, I want to set myself up so I have the best possible chance of landing that fish. And also obviously don't want to overplay fish to get there. The other part of that too, unrelated, of course, to reeling in the fish, is I really like the weight of a slightly heavy reel and how that affects the way the rod bends when I'm casting. That's just me though. But, certainly the guests that I've had on the show so far, when we talk reels, the majority of them are on team click and pawl. So Trevor, it's nice to hear that you and I have a similar attitude there.
You know what's funny? I fish for fish that need drags. That's the one thing I like telling people also.
I like what you guys said. I mean, I do have a couple nice click and pawls. I have a few disc drags. I've been a fan of the Danielson because of the price point, smoothness, the quality. Their anti-reverse that I brought up and showed you, Brian, is just a phenomenal Chinook reel. But yeah, I like what Trevor said. I guess, it's refreshing to hear, like, I'll use them situationally, and also too, if I'm going with a clicker, in Great Lakes, so it's kind of, I still want to do the catch and release and be a good steward. I guess you could make an argument while they're stocked if you kill it, but it's just not an attitude that I really like to ever have. But if I am going to use a clicker, and I do not use them for Chinook anymore, I tried it one time, lost an awesome fish, and just really had no control. And it only took me one encounter. And I'm like, one, it's not the right tool for the job. I can't be convinced otherwise. Two, I just don't think it's super responsible either, because maybe if you have a 13-foot 10 weight and you're running 25-pound maximum at smaller water and you get a 20-pound one and you get it in, there's just a world of difference in big wide open hard water, 30 pounds. But I will say this, when I do fish with a clicker for steelhead, there's a couple things location wise, but I also make sure that I have a rod too that's beefy. I'm beefing up my tippet material and everything, and I'm going into it, going to play it hard and make sure the gear's good. But yeah.
So Alex, are you on Team Maxima?
Well, yeah. So let's talk about that. I mean, Maxima is great.
Well, here, tell you what, walk me through your Chinook setup. You talked
Right
about the
now?
Danielson anti-reverse.
Okay,
You're going Chinook fishing. What's your
10,
rod?
11
What's your
weights.
line?
Yeah, well, I got a 15-foot 11 for big water, and people think that's nuts, but man, you can lift up 15-foot at T whatever. It's easier over the course of the day. So I like at least a 10 weight. I just don't play around too much. I got a big disc drag reel, 68-pound backing to like 60-pound shooting line, probably a multi-density Skagit head. I go kind of nuts. At a minimal, I'll use 25-pound Maxima, sometimes 30. I understand if you get caught up. And I'll use like a 1/0 or 2/0 like saltwater grade hook. And I mean, the drag, I like having a reel that you could chase like tarpon or GT. I do and I like everything to be beefy, because if you tangle with a big one and you got to clamp down on the drag, you need everything really tough to get it and to get it responsibly. So I go quite heavy on Chinook. I've gotten a lot of flack for that too, but I personally don't think, why would you go under, 25-pound Maxima? Sure, that may be overkill, but I mean, I like going heavy. So I don't like anything. I go through all the knots. I got 6-turn surgeon loops, on the backing, like with gloves tightened up, a little UV glue. Like I'm with Trevor, man. I want to. We're going to battle, and when I hook up, I'm going every time I've taken a trip up there. I like to have my gear set up, and so if I catch a fish of a lifetime, I'm ready. That's just how I like to do it. So.
The heavy leader thing too is to combat any mistakes your client should make, and then also the variables when it comes to, for example, fish runs down and goes around a root wad or something. Well, what does that do? It's going to rub a little bit. Okay, there's going to be some abrasion, and chances are it's not going to break as much on heavier stuff versus lighter stuff. When your guy has, okay, you turn around to take a piss. Well, your guy throws a shitty cast. Well, there's going to be a wind knot in there, okay, or a bad casting knot, okay, and that you can still land some fish on 20-pound test with that overhand knot in it. And so my biggest Chinook last season, so you remember Roy Jensen?
Oh yeah, Roy for sure.
Yeah, Roy boy. I'm at a place we call Swallow Hollow, which is it's a Chinook run right above the ocean, and there's a bank with a ton of mud swallows. They're going in and out, and right at the bottom of the run, there's a thing we call wobble stick, and there's a stick out there that's just constantly wobbling, kind of looking like the plug rod we were talking about. And he's fishing with his son, and he hooks a really great fish. Right. And I didn't necessarily check his drag or anything before, but either way, the fish is peeling out. We're in backing, all kinds of stuff, fights it, gets hooked on a stick, like finally comes off, gets off the stick, and he lands the thing. And the thing's probably close to 40 pounds, maybe a little larger.
Wow.
And I go to take the hook out of the fish's mouth, man, and I grab the leader and I'm going down to find the fly, and it looked like somebody took a palm sander to the leader. And then I went to go pull the drag out from the thing, and he had it cranked down so tight. I was sitting there going, Jesus, Roy, like we should have never landed that fish. Like it helps to have a horseshoe stuck up your ass. You know what I mean? Have a little bit of luck. And, but again, another testament to using heavier tippet, because like, especially these fish being anadromous fish and how close we're fishing to the ocean, they don't know any better. They're not sitting there going, I don't know about that, you know? So I'm a big believer in that. And yeah, and if you get snagged up out in the middle, go grab your Skagit head. Don't be lazy and like yank on your running line. Trust no running line, you know, go get it.
One leader tippet material I haven't tested out yet, but I'm interested in it. I got some spools, is the Nam.
Dude, I've got some of that. That spool alone is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, it is. And here's the only thing. I haven't tested it, so I don't know. You know, it's kind of like floral, but not soft. Like, so it has some abrasion resistance, very thin, heavy pound test. If I was coming to the Skeena, I'd grab the 44 pound and put it on. I mean, that's, you know, like 20 pound Maxima, I guess, in thickness. But the one thing I haven't tested out with it, another reason too, I like, you know, 20 to 30, and I get 30s just like, you know, crazy high. 25's probably better, I suppose. But I found too, you know, you go from 15-pound Maxima and you tie on like 25-pound Maxima, just the turnover of the fly is just, it's night and day difference for me, you know, being just kind of a mediocre caster, somebody who gets to do it sometimes. So, and I just honestly, I do not think that in those kind of scenarios for aggressive Chinook, I don't buy into the thinner leader is going to get you more strikes. You know, I guess maybe in ultra clear situations, I don't know, but I don't.
What are your thoughts on thicker leaders being able to sink though? That's always been my biggest question, because I would do the same. I'd go 30, 35 pound for some of these fish too. But then I start thinking like, well, now is that going to negate this a little bit, right?
That's a good question, Trey. I mean, you know, you guys know way more about this than I do. In my experience, you know, if you're going to go into a multi-density head, you know, one of the reasons I like 14, 15-foot rods, if you have the space, is just the turnover of the sink tips and stuff. And gosh, if you get a Skagit Max Game Changer, 15 to 18 feet, T14, T17, man, you know, your tippet's what, 3-4 feet, something like that. I find it so hard to believe that if it was fluorocarbon, you'd get more sink or something like that. You know, in those scenarios, maybe if you're doing floating and long leaders, but yeah.
I will say this, and I'm going back to steelhead for a moment. On the Skeena, I'm running 20-pound Maxima most of the time. That's my go-to. But the scenario where I'll drop down to 15 is if I go with a lighter, smaller fly, because I do feel like, as Trevor was saying, the sink rate gets affected by the diameter and also how the fly fishes. It's not really about, for me, it's not about the cast, because you're right, that short leader is along for the ride. It's going regardless. It's just, you know, the fishability of it. And that material that Dax has, Nam or Nam or whatever it's pronounced, you can stick with that same sort of diameters that we're talking about, but the sold as breaking strength is very, very high. And I did experiment with it myself quite a bit this year. And I was like, you know what? It's not any worse than Maxima. And I like the spool way better. So I'm not sure how this year is going to go for me. I've been on Team Maxima, not getting free stuff from Maxima, but just like buying it and telling anyone else to buy it for a long time. But man, that spool drives me a little crazy.
I'm with you. I'm going to give it a solid run. I've had a love-hate relationship with fluorocarbon.
I hate fluorocarbon.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought still to this day is...
Trevor's not buying it. No fluorocarbon.
Unless it's 4 or 5X and it's like your trout tippet and stuff. I totally understand that. But dude,
Well, saltwater flats,
Oh yeah,
clear
absolutely.
water. You're
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
right. So I'm
Come on,
thinking,
it's a steelhead show, Alex.
I know. Well, I do have some because I do fish. The St. Mary's is gin clear, and when I say gin clear, I mean you can look at rocks 30 feet down. I mean it's as clear as I've ever seen, and so what's fun about that, it took me a while to figure that out. Is actually floating setups, long leaders, like something like a Lady Caroline or even a small woolly bugger is going to outfish a lot of things. I am trying some fluorocarbon, like a 15-pound blue label, but I really like the stuff from Nam. So I've never been sold on floral. I'll give it a shot just because I like buying stuff I don't need and trying it. But yeah,
So we were talking about casting earlier, and I just had a thought come in my head. The other day I posted on Facebook, I had an old video that came up, something I made back in like 2011 or something like that. And one of the casts I did in there was a cast I probably haven't done for 5 or 6 years. And it's a cast that, Trevor, you showed me up in Alaska. It's, similar to a Perry poke, but it's got like a cross-body dump for the poke. You know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking the rewind?
Is that what you call it, the rewind?
Yeah, it's compact and really powerful. And the entire reason for that cast is because of wind. Because I would be sitting on the beach, the wind would be blowing right in either my face or my angler's face, right? And let's just say they're trying to do like a snap tee, or they're trying to go off their left side. Well, they go to do that snap tee, their whole line and the whole fly is blowing right in their face. And so this essentially was a setup like you would set up for a downstream Perry poke, but instead you'd bring the fly up right next to you, and right when the fly is about to you, you're essentially dumping down and crossing back over here. And what that does is it keeps your everything around you really compact. It puts all your line right next to you where you would if you had a Perry poke. And then it also puts your fly out a little bit more so that when you go to come around, the wind isn't going to push your D loop off the water. And the angle of your fly with the wind, you're not going to hit yourself unless you make that your move too soon. Now, this is something that shouldn't be tried around a bunch of brush, but if you try doing this without wind, you can try getting that fly as close as you can, and then you fold it down, and then it's like you're unwrapping a blanket from yourself, and it is super powerful. It's really slick, and you're using not a lot of energy or motion or any of this, because when I see guys lifting their arms up, it's when they start blowing anchors, and they're not using the rod how it was supposed to do, which is loading it up. And you load it up with Skagit lines. That's why Skagit lines were made, to grip water.
It is a cheeky setup. And I got to tell you, there's not a lot of original casts out there these days, right? But you showed that to me in Alaska. I've messed around with it a little bit. I've yet to see another person anywhere ever do it. And a lot of times people, when you show it to them, they don't get it right away. And I had to watch you do it probably 20 times before I figured out what the heck was going on, because it looks like some sort of weird sorcery, but man, it is an effective little unit.
It's silky smooth too. When people actually get it, like other people will call it circus casting, okay, which is doing some stupid bullshit that has no, there's no reason for it, right? Like instead, the main reason I started doing it was A, wind, and then B, when I was doing my downstream Perry poke, if I got my anchor too close to me, I would just wrap it around and it would land right there. So if you brought your rod straight up and stopped, the inertia or the energy from your line, your fly is going to keep going past you regardless. So you can just keep your rod straight up, and then you're essentially just dumping it down, and everything is right there. And as soon as you make one move or one portion of your sweep, the whole thing is bent and loaded like almost to the max. That's the most beautiful part about that fly or that cast. And it's when you get it down, it is smooth, man.
I saw your video come up, Brian, and I did see that cast, and that was my thought. I'm like, what sorcery is this? And it's hard to imagine what's going on, but I'd like to learn this cast now. It sounds, and like Trevor is saying, some of these casts that you see, it's like, it's just all these motions that aren't really doing anything, wasted energy, but there's a real application for this one. And
There is, but there's also, that's kind of the cool thing about Skagit casting or spey casting is that you can do all kinds of shit, but the main thing stays the same. You need to have an anchor of some point, right? And you still need to, in some way, or you still need to load your rod. And people have gotten really, really creative, either out of fishing situations with trees or wind or stuff, or quite frankly, like for me, it was out of boredom sometimes because I got sick of doing a double spey. It's not something I do anymore. So now the majority of the stuff I do are single spays and snake rolls because it's not as sustained as your regular sustained anchor cast. I mean, it touches and it's gone, and they're still super powerful, and you're still out in the water a lot quicker. And they're harder to do because of timing. Like that's the whole beauty of the finesse of this is timing everything. And if you fuck it up, everything's fucked up. So,
and good casting is always going to be about efficiency, and those two casts are the most efficient casts going. And I dabbled a little bit a long time ago, Trev, in distance casting. I wasn't particularly great at it, but an event like Spey-O-Rama, obviously you get the best casters in the world. But I thought there's this whole other level that in a way could be a more interesting contest if someone was interested in making it happen. And that's situational. Okay, so we're going to start right here, and there's a tree overhead, and there's another tree beside us here, and a couple of them sticking out here, and we put the target out there, and now let's see you make the cast. And that's when the creativity part comes into it. That cast you showed me, Trevor, you call it the rewind, is that correct? And you're the one that created that, right? No one showed that to you?
No, nobody showed it to me, but I also don't want to sit here and be like, oh, I'm taking ownership in it. It's like I've never taken ownership in any flies I've done because I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done it, right? But I will say that I've been practicing it for a long time, and I'd never seen it until I did it. But that doesn't mean some guy wasn't out there doing it, But I'm not stealing anybody else's work. That's just I have too much pride for that. So
I've called it the Trevor Covich cast. Now I'll put a proper name on it. The rewind. Nice.
Yeah, because mine was more along the lines of you're talking a competition. Okay. So like you've got a long distance casting competition, right? Okay. The longest casters in the world. So how does that equate to fishing? And most importantly, situational fishing. It's like power without control though, right? Because like I know some people that can cast a country mile, but if you stick them around some trees, dude, not so good.
I love this concept of situational casting, and as much as the casting aspect is so awesome, and I think that's why a lot of people get into it. You see somebody doing it, you saw a video of it, and you're like, man, what wizard, this just looks fun. Probably the same reason we got into fly fishing is you saw somebody doing it once and you're like, what's all this orange line? Gosh, that just looks like a much more fun way to do it. But yeah, me personally, the distance casting is awesome. All the setting of the anchor, the lifts, the sweep. I mean, I have a ton of respect for it. I'm more interested, Brian, I love your idea. And so what happens if you're in a lot of brush and you're trying to cast like T14? Like I need to know how to cast that. Like I don't need to know, as much as I love it, how to cast 200 feet with a 80-foot spey line and a comp rod. I want to know how to get my fly to the fish in a tough situation. I mean, that to me is what I'd like to practice, But
it's where the rubber meets the road.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And wind creates great casters. We saw that in the Connect Talk, right? Like dealing with the wind is just like, that's the thing. Mm-hmm. Before we run out of time, I want to talk flies again, because we talked about briefly, naming casts, original casts, and I think you guys talked about flies patterns being original. But there was a time when people could truly have a fly that they're tying that no one had seen before. I think that time has probably passed. But Could you imagine if the steelheader of 30 years ago could look inside the box of a guy fishing today? Mine would probably be blown. Obviously, materials are part of what's driven that. Alex, I said I wasn't going to ask you any goofy questions, but I'm going to. What is your favorite new material that you're tying with these days that you're excited about? Something that maybe wasn't around a few years ago?
Ooh, well, I'm going to sound like a broken record. That's a tough question, but the SnowRunner or Naiad material that kind of came out of Europe is honestly, it's one of my favorites. Obviously, there's no one material to rule them all like Lord of the Rings, but
You mean rabbit strip?
yeah. So the SnowRunner material, just give it to you in brief. It comes from it's some goat or sheep species that's domestically raised. I think in Poland, they're not going to give up the name of it because they try to keep that under wraps. It does lend itself more to larger flies, I think, but it's one of those materials that it's really simple to make a nice teardrop profile, and it holds its shape even in like the hardest of water conditions. And so, if you were thinking of water where you're like, okay, we need some big intruders or something, it's colored up, it's really heavy. This stuff is way cheaper. I think it's way easier to tie with myself, and it honestly just gives you a better profile. And since it holds itself real well in heavy current, it tends to move a little bit more. If we think flies moving, consequently, it's probably one of the best materials for hollow tying, like bait fish type patterns for pike, muskie, tarpon, GT. So it's pretty cool and fairly cheap. So,
and you're tying commercially quite a bit with it, aren't you?
yeah, I do. I should say, my commercial tying, I guess I'm like semi-pro. I'll do it in like the fall, winter, spring when I slow down a little bit. And that was really just born out of, here I can't really winter steelhead a lot unless I travel because everything just freezes up. So it kind of scratched the itch. And then I found I liked it so much. I'm like, the only way to justify this is going to be to sell some, else my wife's going to tell me I can't buy any more material and stuff. So that's how that all happened. But yeah, I use it quite a bit. People like it. So
right on, Trevor. I know you're a very functional fly tyer. I've used your patterns in Alaska, and especially trout fishing. When it comes to steelhead fishing right now, what are you liking to tie?
It's the same stuff that Grandpa used to use. Marabou.
Nice.
Lots and lots of marabou. Like, got a couple bugs twisted up over there now, but I've been really into a couple patterns right now. But it's essentially just a little bit of synthetic stuff, but a lot of marabou just because A, it sinks fine. B, if it gets caught in a tree, I'm going to cry about it because I didn't spend an hour on that fly. And Dad was catching fish on it. Grandpa was catching fish on it. Nothing's really changed there. And I'm more of, if you looked in my guide bag, which is about this big, okay, I'm a very minimalist fishing guide. I carry a couple sink tips that are usually in the pockets of my waders, a spool of tippet, 20 pound, and then a few separate boxes of flies in different weights and sizes and stuff like that. And what's most important to me is always going to be the lie, where I think there's going to be a fish. Now this can be depending on the river height, or this can be where I'm at in the river depending on tide stuff, right? So that's what interests me. I've never been this pattern like the jungle cock really makes these fish turn on. I'm not that guy at all. It's extra money out of my wallet that I gotta spend on it. The guy who's going to swing too far to the inside, he's going to break it off and he's going to ask for another fly, and he's not going to be like, oh, sorry about your hour that you just wasted. He's going to want another fly. And enough fish eat the stuff I'm throwing, so I'm essentially not changing.
Are you tubes or shanks or a mix?
Oh, so this is a great question. So back in the day, I started trying tubes and stuff like that. Well, I got really fed up with them. They were breaking a lot, and I couldn't get much out of them. So I started going with shanks, right? And as you know, with certain shanks, like the same reason I don't tie a lot of intruders, like the longer the shank goes, the harder they are to turn over, especially when you're talking your clients fishing them, right? So then I started fishing really short stuff with dumbbell eyes or heavy tungsten cone stuff that throws like a bar dart. Okay. So really aerodynamic, easy for people to pull out of the water and cast. And I still do some of that stuff on a really short shank. If I'm trying to do a lot of weight on a fly, but for the most part now I'm using Pro Tubes, and I went with the Pro Tube system just because I like the way the flies turn out. I like the way I can essentially set my hook wherever I want it to. The fly comes undone like it's supposed to, away from the hook. There's just a lot of good stuff to it. And it's something I had to come back to because I was pretty anti-tube for a really long time, but it was because I had a bad experience, and generally you get gun shy going back to it. And the trailing wire is a pain in the ass sometimes. It's an extra step I really don't want to take. And then when you don't see it to a hook correctly, or if it's not at the right poundage, it's going to get frayed because the eye of an octopus hook isn't fully welded, right? So it can slip through. Then it's going to sit funny. It's going to be people hanging back too far, further than they're supposed to. On the commercial patterns, you can't change your hook out because the loop they made is too small. They essentially, I go on and on about the things that piss me off with flies, especially commercial patterns. And that's why if you want something done right, you do it yourself, because then you only have you to blame. And there's nothing that pisses me off more than gear malfunction, especially when it's in the hands of somebody else. Drives me nuts. Like I had a guy on this old duck this year. It was the first steelhead I hooked all season, swinging a nice little fish trap. Steelhead eats it. Guy loses the fish. He's like, fuck. So he keeps fishing. He fishes out as a short spot. He comes back and he's like, there's no trailing loop or hook or anything. So the guy who tied it, he skipped a couple steps in order to tie a bunch of flies and make some money. And again, the flies look really good, but the rest of us, I told him the rest of your fly box, those are Christmas ornaments from here on out, because I'm not putting those on. There's no way. So if you want something done right, do it yourself. And the next thing, and I'm sure this has changed around a little bit, but when a lot of production style steelhead and chinook flies you start coming out, some were decently tied, some were really well tied, but then they would have a hook on there that was so cheap. It would bend out super easy. They would break, stuff like that. And that's the one thing that's never computed with me much. The one thing that is keeping you in contact with your fish, you're going to dumb it down to save some money. That's like one of the most important things you can do. And everything else after that has value to it. Your knot, your leader, all the other stuff, your drag. You got to have sharp hooks, and you got to have stuff that's not going to bend out. So I'm a big fan of a nice hook. Okay. And a sharp hook. I don't usually carry around a file too. I got some clients who do the same thing, but I switch out hooks plenty.
I think that's important. I mean, it's such a bummer to see a client lose a fish to something that was entirely preventable, right?
Dude, they spent good money on it too.
Yeah. Glad to hear you bring up the length of a trailer hook sitting behind a fly, because I think that can be a real fish killer, especially on like a wispy fly, like a hobo spey, with the fly sitting on the dangle. And, fish can take that too deep. So I think that's an important point for people who are tying steelhead flies to consider. Make your trailer loop big enough to accept the hook. It doesn't need to be any bigger than that.
Something else I would tell folks too, that especially when you're starting to tie flies and make loops with trailing wire, if you find it too long and you can't fix it, you can always go through the eye of the hook, come around. Okay. Start twisting it. Okay. It'll get shorter and shorter and shorter. And then you can actually make it. And so this has two things. A, you can make your trailing wire shorter, which is safer for the fish, and you're going to get a better hook set. Okay. And then the next thing is, and this is and what I find super important is that once it gets thick enough, the hook looks snelled, or it's got a snelled look to it. So it's sitting flatter. And then also it's built up enough around where that hook isn't fully welded that it's not gonna go through that crack, and it's not gonna get frayed. Right. So you've got two preventative things there going by shortening it that way. That's if you make it too long.
That's good advice. And I'm going to hit you guys up for a couple more pieces of advice as we wrap up here.
Yeah.
So I want to first off here, thank you both for joining me today. I've known you guys a while, so it's fun to connect this way.
Yeah.
You two had never met before, had you?
Negative.
No, but so yeah, fun to have this chat with you today. So I like to wrap up the show by giving folks an opportunity to, tell people how to find them if they want to be found. And I'm also going to hit each with a question. But before I do, I want to extend an invite. We'd love to have you back sometime. One of the things within the bucket, the concept is we're going to have some of these folks back and just to have more conversations because I got a lot more stuff to talk to you about. So Alex, I'm going to go first with you.
Sure.
So here's your question, and then you can also tell people if they want to buy some of your flies. I don't know how big your waiting list is. I know you got a bunch to tie for me, hopefully, but let them know how to find you. Also want people to know that when they're looking at your flies, that you are a heck of a flower arranger. That I think that your background in building, special floral displays has really helped when it comes to matching up colors. Because when I look at the flies that you're tying, there's not a lot of original stuff out there, but your color combos are still quite original. And I like the way you mix that up.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about if people want to find you, buy some flies, how they're going to do that. But here's my question. If they call you up and they want to buy flies, what fly that they're not thinking of right now should they be looking to buy for a trip out west, whether it's for Chinook or for steelhead, and go?
Okay. I would say something like a olive and copper temple dog or something of that nature. And here's why. It swims a little bit differently, and you want to have something different too, especially if you're coming behind people. They have a decent profile, they swim well, but everyone has marabou patterns which work great, or leeches is going to be pink, orange, black, and blue. It's nice to have something that just swims a little bit differently, that's a different color combo. So I would try a Scandi style fly, and olives, coppers, and reds. I think you might like having a couple in your box, especially if you're fishing around a bunch of people. But that's my suggestion.
And if they want to buy flies, check out your flies online. How do they find you?
Sure. Instagram, Straights on the Fly, or you can just find me on Facebook, Alex Belonga, and shoot me a message or anything. And I'm usually pretty quick to get back to people. So.
Right on. We have a website, of course, that supports the show. I'll put some notes in there, help people find their way to you, and maybe hit you up for some photos of your flies.
Do I get to ask you one silly question? I've been thinking about this for a long time.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm really surprised we didn't get into any kind of good debate about, steelhead in the Great Lakes. But I've been thinking about this, Brian. So in Michigan, because the whole issue here is salt, I think, if I'm, understanding correctly. In Michigan, we actually salt our roads, and that all has to actually flow right into the lake. So I wonder if the steelhead here up in my river, have actually tasted or seen salt, something to think about. So,
dude, you make a great argument for it. I'll have to come check it out sometime.
Okay.
Right on. So, Trevor, my question to you is this, and I think this is a great question, and I know you're going to have a good answer. So, for a prospective guide client, someone who's going to hire you for the day, what should they be asking you prior to booking, and what should they do in preparation for their trip to get the maximum benefit from the time they're going to spend with you?
Well, first thing is don't ask advice that you're not going to take. Okay. Like if you pay for a fishing trip, it would be wise to listen to your fishing guide. That's the first thing. Second thing, I'm a straightforward dude. And if you're screwing something up, I'm going to say something, because like, this is my day too. If you're winning on the water, I'm feeling good about doing my job. But I guess I don't know. It's just, it kind of depends on what their skill set is too. And also what their expectations are. I mean, cause when you talk about steelhead fishermen or Chinook fishermen, I mean, you have all types of expectation levels. You got the guy who immediately out of the gate asked me, how many fish do you think we're going to catch today? Right. And in my crystal ball, which I don't have one, right? I don't know. Because every day is different. That's kind of the beauty of this thing. It's a whole adventure. And I have an idea of how it's kind of going to play out, but sometimes it changes. Right. And so one thing about me is that like, we're going to fish really hard. You're going to sleep really well. I guarantee you that. And then, and you're also going to have a super good chance at hooking a steelhead. I take a lot of pride in putting people on fish, and just because I've been doing it a long time, especially in this area, and then all around, I've molded my entire life around this. This house I'm sitting in is because I'm really close to a boat launch that I really like. Okay. And it's, but I would tell them too, is also my demeanor. It changes throughout the day. In the morning, I'm chewing on nails until we land a fish, right? Most of my clients enjoy me much more after we've landed something. Okay. Because like I'm pretty focused on making things happen, and there's plenty of pressure to it too. Right. But what I guess is, what you're going to get is you're going to get a really good shot at hooking a fish. You're going to see a beautiful place. You're going to sleep well. And then if you also need help with fishing and casting, I do a fair amount of casting stuff, but I mainly really like to talk about fishing, because once the fly hits the water is where things start happening. Okay. And you start to get people to realize why their line's doing what it's doing, and how you can hold it in certain places. And also the water we're kind of going after. I fish some sneaky stuff, and I take a lot of pride in having an eye for water, I guess.
And how would your prospective guests find you online?
So I don't have a website, because websites cost money, and it doesn't do much for me. But you can get a hold of me on Instagram at OP Fly Guy, and that's where plenty of people can contact me there. There'll be an email there as well, but I usually don't have a ton of space. So the new prospect thing, like it kind of takes a while to get a shot at getting some dates, especially down here. I manage a lodge up in Alaska as well for Chinook and for steelhead. And so we're always trying to find new prospects for those places too. And then, so it's essentially just trying to manage both of those things. And then also your personal life, your family and whatnot. And then, right now, so I've been setting up furniture for an Airbnb. I'm building a new Airbnb right now.
That's in Forks as well, right?
Yeah, it's in Forks, because we have a high influx of tourists that come out here, especially in the summertime. And then we have what are called twilighters. Okay. And if Twilight was a vampire movie, it was based off a book, which they placed it right here. So we have all these tourists that come out here looking for vampires, people looking for Sasquatch, people just want to look at moss in our beaches. And then of course we have the fishermen, right? So it's been a great way to make a little extra cash and then kind of diversify and not put all your eggs in one basket, I guess is what you're saying.
I think that's great advice for any young fishing guide. Obviously, Trevor, you've been a fishing guide for a long time, started young, and you're still pretty young. So hopefully you'll be a fishing guide for a long time to go.
Mm-hmm. I know, I feel it, but it's like, as you get older, it gets a little harder to get out of the bed, and then you got to keep up with the younger guys. Right. And so, but I guess that's another thing I like, talking to when I talk to younger fishing guys, because if you've been in this long enough, you realize that, and you're working for yourself, there's no retirement plan. There's no health care. You're not going to see your family very much, right? The list goes on and on and on. But what you are going to do is you're going to be out in a really cool place, hopefully not in too much traffic. You're going to be in a boat for 8 to 10 hours with people that are far more successful than you, older than you, with life experiences. And what I tell people is to take your 8 to 10 hour day and go to school. These people are booking you so you can teach them how to be a better fisherman. And that's great. Well, you should be prodding them for a little bit of stuff too. Like some of my greatest mentors are my clients, and they've been through I mean, and not just financial stuff, marriage, you know, I'm getting all kinds of advice because I'm going to be freshly married here very soon. And so I'm always trying to get the perspective of people that have been doing this a lot longer than me. And so I guess what I would say is really take advantage of the people that are in your boat for their knowledge. And then in the same time, you're going to get some great friendships with some people that would go to bat for you in any way, shape, or form, whether it's whether you're guiding some doctors or an orthopedic guy that can help you out with your knee's been bothering you. I had a shoulder issue the other day, and there's a client that I have who's a great orthopedic guy, and he gives you all kinds of advice, but you got to take it, right? So
you know what, Trevor, I know a lot of fishing guides, and I mean this to anyone listening. I can't stress this enough. Trevor Covich is literally in the top 2 or 3 fishing guides I know. I was very fortunate enough to be guided by you when you were a much younger guy in Alaska. And
I was not very good back then.
No, dude, you had great set of eyes. You could see the fish. Great boat driver. But one of my favorite memories of going fishing was that time I went with you and your dad way the heck up the Arolic. Mm-hmm. And I literally had, to me still, I'm a nap guy. And this is probably like top 2 or 3 naps in my entire life on the warm sandy beach of the Arolic amongst the bears, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. The funniest thing is you had no idea, but my dad and I, we left you there for a bit. It was kind of going to be a joke, but the joke wouldn't have worked because you were fast asleep. You wouldn't even have known. But then we got down the river a bit, and I'm sitting there going like, Jesus, we're in bear country. Like, he's a walrus on a beach right now. Like, you know, he's ripe for the picking. And so we went back and woke you up. And but no, it was a nice sandy spot. It was right below the Kingdom Channel on the Arolic. Great place to take a nap. And it's crazy how that works when you get a little bit of sun on you and you find a nice sandy spot, how easy it is to fall asleep.
Dude, river naps are the best.
Yeah. You're just lucky there was a little wind and the mosquitoes weren't torching you that day. It was a nice day. You'd caught a really nice fish on a mouse right to start the day down by Dale's Run where the river first splits. I remember that on a mouse, and then me and my dad, we just kind of palled around and went look for trout.
Guys, I hope, I know you're busy. Trevor, you got marriage coming up. Alex, you got as many kids as I do. Our season up here is long. You know, we fish July through October, mid-October in the summer, and obviously we have our spring season coming up. If you guys get a chance, would love to see you up here again sometime soon. But until then.
I would love to. Yeah, Trevor, really nice meeting.
Yeah, and you.
Good listening to you. I appreciate all the info, man.
Oh no, dude! Look, I before this thing, I did some perving on your Instagram account. You got some nice flies, man.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I really dig the flies. Like, I didn't get to cruise as long as I thought I would, but beautiful fly.
And I'm with you, by the way. A lot of my own fishing, I fish marabou with some flies too. So yeah. Brian, good seeing you again.
Guys, thanks again. And like I said, hope to have you back sometime. And until then, Trevor, have a wonderful season. And Alex, tie some flies. All right, you guys, have a great day.
Okay. Take care, guys. See ya.
See you.
Well, folks, that's our show for today. Once again, I want to thank Alex and Trevor for joining me. To the listener, I appreciate you tuning in. You can find show notes for this episode, as well as all of our episodes, online at www.inthebucketpodcast.com. If you want some help with your spey casting and want to fish together this summer, you can find information on the Wet Fly Swing School of Fishing Spey School taking place at our lodge, Skeena Spey, this August. Until then, I look forward to bringing you our next episode of In the Bucket next month, when I'll be talking with April Vokey from Anchored Outdoors and Tim Arsenault, fresh off his win at Speyorama World Spey Casting Championships. If you're on Instagram, you can follow us at In the Bucket Podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at info@skeenaspey.com.